And so this is a lecture taken from chapter 14 out of there. And then I've added some stuff from another book that's titled The Sustainable Revolution. And we use that. It's just a little soft paperback copy. We use it in our other class that looks at this, which is 74A, Conservation and Leadership Practices. And so I took a few things out of that basically what that book does is look deeply into sustainability principles, like using technology appropriately, things like that. All right? So why is global environmental security important? We know that, yes, it's not just environmental. In this class, we've been looking at social, economic, and environmental. Why is it important? Well, for national security, economic security, and we all know that our economies now are supported by natural capital. In the past, other times, other places, we just looked at money and buildings and people, and we never looked at the natural capital. And we know that to be secured going into the future, we need to look at natural capital. What's really happening to our soils? What's really happening to our water supply? What's happening on the health front, right, with some of these pressures that are going on? Right? How can we develop stronger national policies? The United Nations is the most influential. They're the people that sort of framed the sustainability the sustainability conversation, and they're the ones that came up with the definition we use most often for sustainable development. But other people are groups like the World Bank. The World Bank is based in the United States, but it goes all over the world giving out loans to developing economies. And we need them to think sustainably. If they're going to give a loan, a grant to a certain country, are they going to do it based on sustainability principles, or are they going to do it on the old style where we didn't really consider sustainability as much, okay? And then we also need to look at developing international environmental laws and conventions, okay? So this one is really hard to see. You guys are going to have to look it up yourself, but I'm just going to read it off to you real quick. So there's been a lot of environmental laws and environmental conventions. There's over 500 of them where the world's got together and said, mostly through the United Nations, and said, here's what we should do, okay? So the one that actually worked and is very famous was in 1992. They came up with what is called the Copenhagen Ozone Convention, okay? We noticed that, what's the word? What are those things called? The things you put in air conditioners and help me out, guy. Huh?
Compressors?
No, what's the fluid you put in your air?
Freon. Refrigeration.
Yeah, but fluorocarbons, right? Hydrofluorocarbons. And they were causing our ozone layer up in the upper atmosphere to break down, and we were getting things like extra skin cancers and all sorts of things. And they changed that. They banned certain hydrofluorocarbons from being used. They limited the use. And basically the ozone hole, which is that hole in the upper atmosphere, has pretty much disappeared. So we actually, through an international treaty, we actually solved that problem. Okay? Then we looked at, in 1992, one of the big ones was the Rio Accord, which was on sustainable development. So that's this one down here. And what were the principles for handling global environmental problems? Okay, so that's called the Rio Accord. Rio de Janeiro is where that meeting happened. That was followed up, as you know, by later on the Johannesburg Sustainable Development Protocols and Accords. And then we've kind of gone from there. And some of them have been successful, some of them haven't. The Copenhagen one was highly successful. The Rio Accords and then the climate change accords, the ones coming out of that in recent years have been somewhat successful. Up until this year, when the United States decided they were basically backing out of all of that. And so the point with all of that, wherever you are politically, is there's been a lot of work gone on to internationally try to come up with some international solutions and agreements and accords, and that's in recent times taken a serious setback because the United States, who leads all of that, has backed out. Okay, so, all right, we can implement sustainable principles. There's certain principles in certain industries that are really making a big change. They're taking these industries by storm. And they just happen to be in our kind of area. So the Forest Stewardship Council, we talked about how our forests are actually in the first world actually very sustainably managed. They replant properly. They have all kinds of principles they go through. We talked about that earlier in the class. LEED, which is the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. These are sets of standards for building houses and new buildings, okay? And then sustainable wine growing practices. So these have really been implemented and they're working. They've changed those industries, okay, to be way more sustainable. The question is why, how, what happened? What's the answer? There's lots of these principles around. What does it take to make a sustainable principle like, let's pick LEED. One of the principles in LEED is that you will use as much solar energy for your energy supply in your house. Okay, and they have certain standards. If you meet X amount of your energy, electricity, let's say, for example, through solar, you get a certain rating. And they do it very simply. You go from silver, there might be others, I think there's bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. So, for example, the Lewis Center. I know, any of you ever been associated with the Lewis Center over here on the Narrows? That school, I think, is gold. It's a gold building. And it's got some solar panels and all of that. And so you meet a certain standard. But that's what it comes down to is there are certain criteria you have to meet, methods of getting there. How do you make that happen? And they're not prescriptive. They don't tell you exactly how to do it, but they are rigorous and they are well defined. You know exactly what you need. If you're going to get the Forestry Council stamp on your lumber that's sold at Home Depot, you've got to go through these specific things. You've got to manage your water properly. You've got to replant. You don't get to do clearing. Clear cut. Thank you. Clear cutting, that kind of thing. Okay. So they're not prescriptive in how you do it, but they're very defined in what you have to do. Okay. You don't just say, "Oh, we'd like to be sustainable." You've got to define what that really means. Okay. So LEED provides a flexible yet well-defined rating system for achieving its various certification levels. LEED and the Natural Step, which is an associated program, also evaluate the systems approach for designing and operating high-performance buildings and businesses. We look at the thing as a whole system. Okay? So, where are we with this whole thing? Well, it takes, like we've talked a lot, the focus of this class has really been not to preach to you or influence your thinking, but to have you start thinking differently. And we all come to the table, hopefully, with some kind of worldview, how we see the world, and in this case, how we see the world in a sustainable perspective, and our part of it. Okay? And so these worldviews, environmental worldviews, can be human-centered, anthropocentric, or they can be life-centered, biocentric. Okay? And then with that, tied in with that is environmental ethics, right? It's what one believes about what is right and what is wrong in our behavior towards the environment. Okay? We've talked a lot about this. Is it appropriate for us to take biodiversity, genetics, and genetically engineering? Is that ethical? Right? Many of us believe, at least if we do that with humans, it's unethical, right? So that's how ethics ties into it. Okay? So there could be, there's three that the book mentioned, and I think they're good categories. And all the point of this is not to study them, but to kind of look at where you kind of fit. Where does your worldview? You're not going to be one or the other, just like I hated when people say you're a Republican or a Democrat, or you're a conservative or you're a liberal. I'm like, that is absolutely insulting to me. I am highly conservative in some ways, and I'm as crazy liberal as anyone you could pick on the other side. Because I'm going to think about these things, and I'm going to make my own decisions, not based on what one political party is going to tell me or whatever, right? So planetary management worldview, you think about as humans being the most important and dominant species. We can and should manage the Earth mostly for our own benefit, okay? So I feel like that's where first world countries, I feel like that's where this country is and is starting to drift back to. It's all about the people, all about us, okay? Stewardship worldview is where I personally hope I am and where my behavior reflects, and I'm not telling you it's the best one, I'm just saying that's where I am. So we need to use the Earth's natural capital. We need to use it. We have to understand, we talked a lot. Remember that original slide where we looked at, okay, we're going to have to use the natural capital. There are going to have to be trade-offs. We're going to have to find solutions. And then we're going to get people engaged. Individuals matter. So if you look back to that, first of all, if you're going to have a stewardship worldview, you're going to be a good manager. Remember we talked about how a steward back in olden day times, biblical times even, was the person that you gave your most important stuff for them manage. They took care of it. It was beyond being a servant. They were actually a caretaker. And they were supposed to do better things with it. They were supposed to make it, take good care of it, but even manage it to where it actually improved in terms of condition and all that. Okay? But we are borrowing. When we use natural capital, we take the attitude that we're borrowing this from future generations, right? And if we're going to borrow it from you, our grandkids, our great-grandkids, or however you want to think about it, we are going to say we're going to be good stewards of that. We're going to take good care of that. We're not going to waste it. We're not going to destroy it. We're not going to pollute it within limits, right? We are still going to use it. Then there's the third one is environmental wisdom worldview, where we kind of look at it from the natural side, from the earth side, the trees and the animals and the insects and everything. We look at it from their perspective. And so we really, really respect the value of life, and we look at it from what's best for them. So that is a very, I think in the past, that would be where some of the very environmentally focused people come from, is don't really care as much about the human side of it or the steward side of it. Is this little habitat or this particular species being taken care of? So that's the environmental wisdom worldview. Okay? And the words aren't that important. It's just where are you going to focus? Strictly from a human perspective, from a stewardship perspective, or from an environmental wisdom. You know, it's all about the birds and the bees, basically. Okay, so this one just kind of maps that out for you, some of the behaviors that you would expect under these. And I'm not going to go into this in great detail because it doesn't matter. The point is, by the end of this, learning this, does this help you look at yourself? Because I think one of the things that's really important is we start asking questions about our own behavior. Why do I, for example, let's say, really, really care if we run out of resources, and why do I care about all the waste, right? Why does it matter? Why does it matter to me? I have this wonderful neighbor, right? If you saw him, he's the ultimate, what I call a desert rat. I consider myself a desert rat too, but he's this hillbilly guy, and he doesn't have much money, but he lives way out. He's our neighbor, and he goes around to all the food giveaways. And he goes and gets food. But he comes at the end. And the amount of food that he picks up, the other day he showed up at our house with his whole back of his truck filled with lettuce. Lettuce was perfectly good. It's all packaged up, 3 heads per thing. And it was perfectly good. And he was like, I can't even give this stuff away. And it absolutely breaks his heart. It's not that he wants to go get more food or more stuff and stuff. He just can't stand the thought that that's just being wasted. Because he's raised animals and he's a person lives close to the land, and he just can't handle it. And I'm almost saying to him, Jim, don't even go to those things because they're depressing you, because they're just throwing away massive amounts of food, right? So anyway, that's the worldview thing. So how can we live more sustainably? Well, first thing, we already talked about this. Natural capital matter. First, we're going to get environmental literate. And hopefully you've got a little bit, and I don't mean you were illiterate. I'm not throwing stones at you, but we've all got to be more environmental literate. We've got to understand how these things work. That's why we started the class with what is symbiosis? How do ecosystems work? How do they relate? Because if you don't understand how something works, then even if you do start caring, you don't really know how you can help or you can make a positive impact, all right? So natural capital matters. That's a basic understanding. Is yes, we need to look at how we're using these resources responsibly. What are our ecological footprints? Realizing that in the United States, footprints are immense, and realizing how simple it is in some ways to start working on that. Realizing that there are ecological and climate tipping points, okay? I personally am starting to see a high level of angst in people. This whole thing, and the media is not helping, but these fires that just came through. What was the context of all of that? Climate change, right? What did you hear pounded my wife, because she literally feels for every dog, cat, bug, person that got burnt up in that fire. She does. She's just beside herself. She really identifies with that. But all she's getting pounded with in the background, this is climate change. And the point is, have we reached that tipping point where our ecosystems start to collapse because we've basically overused them? And I personally feel like, and it's a great conversation, but I feel like there's a high level of people, if you start thinking about this, it's a high level of angst and despair about this because we're just getting pounded. Are we actually at that point already?
Governor Jerry Brown said that this might be a new normal for California because of the global warming.
Exactly. Yeah. So you've got major leaders basically saying, what he's really saying, if for people that are literate about this and understand, he's basically saying, whoops, sorry. Where were we? Oh, he's basically saying we've reached that tipping point. If it's a new normal, then that means these catastrophic fires that can go right through cities is the new normal. A fire like the big one there that's now burnt 164,000 acres is normal. Well, that means the system has reached a tipping point. We've gone to a new system. And if you're thinking about things, that's really disturbing, you know? Okay, literacy requires answering key questions and having basic understanding of key topics. Okay, so there's one right there. Okay, climate change, is it real? That's a key question right now. Regardless, like on the final, there's a question on there that says, climate change, is it anthropogenic? Is it caused by man? More important question, is it real? Is it happening? Are we right in the middle of it? Because that requires a whole different set of responses from society. Okay? Questions to answer? How does life on Earth sustain itself? These are all stuff gone through. I think the book does a pretty good job of just, what is some of these basic, kind of like the old thing, you know, we all ask ourselves this question, what's the purpose of your life, of my life, your life? How am I connected to the earth and other living things? I think we've lived quite disconnected. I think we've gone over that a lot. Where do the things I consume come from and where do they go? Again, when you live in a city, you don't see the trash. You don't see the waste dump out here. You don't see those things. What is environmental wisdom? What is my environmental worldview? What is my environmental responsibility as a human being? That's the key one, right? Do I actually take responsibility, or am I just going to give up, throw my hands up, and sit in front of the TV eating Cheetos, right? What is going on here? And there's a price to pay. I understand why people do that because, you know, it can be, these are big questions that are hard to answer and might cause you some distress. Okay. Basic concepts of components to answering those. These are all things that we've covered. Okay. So this is just kind of, again, looking at your thinking and thinking about what this class hopefully has made you rethink, right? What is soil conservation? How do we do that? This stuff is important because when you start looking at the solutions, that's when you get hope. You can say, well, no, if tillage, overplowing is a problem, right? Then we don't have to do that. We can do no tillage systems, right? We don't have to plow up. How do we conserve soil? Well, we plant windbreaks. Start looking, what about sustainable use? We can use some of those irrigation systems we saw on the field trip. So we can start thinking about the solutions. And I know personally that's a really healthy thing for me because otherwise I'd be like super depressed and buy more Cheetos. Can we learn from the earth? Of course we can. So has your worldview and thinking changed? Do you have another thing that's also important is a sense of place, right? One thing that really disturbs me about people that live in the Mojave, when you first come into the Mojave, it doesn't look like a very friendly, exciting place. But if you've actually gone out and experienced it, it's an awesome place. So if you want to keep seeing more of that, take the water management class, AGNR 173. We do a 2-day field trip way out into the desert looking at water management and looking at the desert. But do you have a better understanding of the Mojave? And are you, without kind of whispering under your breath, you would say, oh, I actually live in the Mojave rather than being embarrassed about living here, right? And do you have a commitment to take individual responsibility? Okay. So Aldo Leopold was one of the original people. We did watch the Green Fire movie at the beginning. We never did on this class. Huh? That's a pity. We got to get that back in here. But anyway, he was one of the people that started really thinking about this ethos of protecting and conserving nature. One thing that I wanted to kind of point out to you guys one more time is the difference between those two words. Anybody want to take a different? There's a whole group of people that want to be protectionists. There's another group of people that want to be conservationists. Does anybody want to take a run at how those might be different? How are those people different? All sound good. I want to protect nature, for example, or I want to conserve nature. How might those be different?
So possibly like protect means like to not touch it, to just keep it contained,
Yeah.
just to
Yeah.
like make sure nobody
Yeah.
hurts it.
Yeah.
But to conserve means you save it, you practice sustainable yield.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So if you really look at the two, the protectionist ones say, let's put a fence around it. Let's reduce the amount of land use by people, basically. Takes people out of the equation. And that seemed like a really good solution, except we've got all these people and we don't have much land to do that in. So to do that in our system, you declare wilderness. Wilderness is the highest level of protection. And people, in a wilderness, you would no longer be able to hunt. You wouldn't be able to do any mining. You probably could hike, but you probably definitely couldn't ride a mountain bike. So you really take away the use of that land. Okay? Grazing becomes a real issue in a wilderness. Conserving, exactly like you said, you actually manage it. You say, yes, we need to use that land. We can use that land. And let's say one of the good ways to use that land and also take good care of it would be allow cattle grazing. So out there in the Mojave, there's a fellow out there, Rob Blair, grazes 7,000 cattle on 700,000 acres of government land, okay, in the Mojave Preserve. And there's been a huge amount of controversy. Basically, the way they got to stay there was through direct action from Dianne Feinstein years ago. But they're out there, they've got a very low grazing capacity, and they're not overgrazing. And most people would say that area is actually doing better because it's grazing away all the extra biomass, the grasses, and they're reducing the risk of fire, right? It's just one good thing. And the ecosystems themselves are doing great. So that's the difference between protection and conserving. And I think there's place for both. I personally am over here. We've got tools to manage this better and use it. We can use it responsibly. That's what conserving is. It's got management in it. This one's got more about just sealing it off and kind of pushing it away from where it would get used, okay? So those are two important things to think about. And we use those words interchangeably, and the book uses protection a lot, and I think they really mean to use conserve more, but they maybe don't define it quite the same way as I do, okay? A thing is right when it leads to preservation, to preserve or conserve the integrity, stability, and the beauty of a biotic community. It is wrong when it tends to do otherwise. That's an Aldo Leopold quote. Okay? How can I live more simply and lightly on the earth? I can practice voluntary simplicity. Is anybody in this room that would kind of put themselves in that category? Voluntarily living simple. Not because you don't have any money and you can't buy a car, but you voluntarily decide, I don't need a car, for example. Which is kind of hard to do up here, by the way. Yes? So what were the things you're doing to make, just voluntarily live a simple life?
I have a car.
Yeah.
It's a 93 Honda Accord.
Uh-huh.
4 cylinders, but I don't use it anyways.
Yeah.
I take the public bus.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
walk from my house to the bus stop.
Okay.
And I
Okay.
come here and I take
Okay.
the bus back home.
Yeah.
Even though there's a car that I have,
Yeah.
it's fuel efficient.
Uh-huh.
But yeah.
Okay, that's a good example. So you have a car, I'm just repeating the answer for the tape. You have a car, but you choose not to use it because there is public transport, works well enough. You've got to, kind of takes a little more time, but you voluntarily choosing not to use a car and more wasteful thing. Yeah, okay, cool. Okay. The principle of enoughness from Mahatma Gandhi. I mean, I know that he lived a life of simplicity, that, he walked around India, he walked around South Africa, gaining the public opinion he needed for what he did. Do you know what that actually means? Do you know what that, anything that, this principle of enoughness, I didn't have time to look that up.
No, not really.
No, okay. Huh? Whoop. Okay. All right. And then many religions all over the world teach a simpler ethical lifestyle, stewardship, right? Personally, my stewardship ethic comes from my religion. It clearly, in my personal idea of where it comes from and how it's applied, definitely I feel comes from there. So definitely religions do teach this stuff. So it all fits in. Okay. So what would we do to be simpler? There we got reduce car use by walking, biking, carpooling, and mass transit. That's what you do. Okay. Resource use, reduce, reuse, recycle, the 3 R's. Food, reduce meat consumption. Buy or grow local. Buy or grow organic food and buy locally grown food. Okay. We've talked all about these, but these are just some of what we now would call sustainable practices that also come from just trying to live sustainably, and that also requires living simply. We don't need all of these technologies for one thing. Okay. Avoid some mental traps, gloom and doom, pessimism. I must admit, when I watch too much of these fires, I get quite pessimistic. Our political science professor, who didn't actually guest lecture in here, talks about a lot in political science. They talk about being critical, not cynical. So yes, we need to look at what's going on. We need to look at policies. We need to look what our governments are doing. We need to look at what Victor Valley College is doing and be critical, which doesn't have to be cynical. You can be positively critical. You can ask questions. Why are you doing that? And help them come up with better solutions. Rather than being cynical and just saying, well, it's all going to hell in a handbasket and I don't care. Okay? And I'm going to be super cynical. Nothing's going to work. The earth's going to overheat and fry up anyway, so why would you care? Okay? Recognize the diversity of possible solutions. We do have solutions. and have fun and enjoy life. Well, yeah, it's great. Have fun's cool. But I think you get a lot of satisfaction engaging in your community and your local environment. So just take a hike. Just get out there and actually enjoy it. And you'll be like, man, yeah, this is really cool. I got to see a jackrabbit, and that was really cool. I saw the other day I saw a prairie falcon flew and landed on a pole right in front of the house. I was like, man, that's so cool. That guy's still surviving. That's a good thing. Okay, sustainability revolution. Like I said, a little bit of this talk comes from a book called The Sustainability Revolution. So we're going to see major culture shifts. It's the society, the culture that has to change, environmental changes, social changes, technology changes, and economic changes. Okay, how can we change? We can change faster than we might think. So I've told you guys a story a lot of times about me personally deciding I needed to get socially engaged in social action and the renewable energy, and it was incredible how our group of people have been able to change the way renewable energy is going to be done in the Mojave. It's absolutely 180 degrees from where it was, maybe 170. But it's very, very different. We're not going to have these huge industrial scale plants in the wrong places. We're going to have some of them, we're going to be in the right places. For example, in Lucerne Valley, a very sustainable community, they said, if you want to do a big renewable energy plant, great, we'd love to have it in our community. Give us a few jobs. You can go put it right in the middle of our dry lake bed. Nobody's out there, nobody can see it, it's not affecting the value of anybody else's homes. Nobody uses that area. You're not going to affect our rural lifestyle. Go do it out there. That's a sustainable solution that came up. And those things happen amazingly fast when you get engaged. You'll be quite surprised that you actually can do something. And that relates to the fact that we have a system, a political system that allows these things to happen, actually. It's designed for that, actually. Okay? So current emphasis, sustainability emphasis. If you just look at energy and climate change, we're into fossil fuels, energy waste, and climate disruption. We could use solar energy, we could be more efficient, and we could stabilize the climate. So those are just directly looking at when we apply some sustainable practices, what can happen. Okay? I love this little thing, it's kind of cute. So if we're unsustainable living and we do these things, if we reduce waste, we can actually have an exponential curve towards more sustainable living. It actually can happen quite quickly. So we don't have to be cynical and pessimistic. You can actually, and I saw that in this area of changing the way we're going to do solar energy locally. We saw a big change in how sustainable our lifestyles are for us now and for our kids. Okay, revisiting the principles of sustainability. So one of the things that is a way for us to be more sustainable is to really think about these principles, like using solar energy, like using chemical cycles that are naturally there. Okay, but it requires bold leadership from government and business. Okay, we were very fortunate that we had a county supervisor that is pretty bold and listened to us, and he made some things happen for sustainability around renewable energy. Grassroots involvement of citizens, right? That I have to give credit to a local in the Alliance for Desert Preservation and a group of ladies. I don't know if you guys were been around VVC. They came to VVC, then they set up tables up on Upper Campus, and they took signatures from you guys as to talking about renewable energy. Do you want a large-scale wind generation plant in your backyard, or do you think there's better solutions? And they started this ball rolling that we then jumped on, and a whole bunch of other groups in the high desert jumped onto. And it was a complete grassroots involvement. But it's the citizens, each individual person has to say, you know what, I see there's a problem here. What can I do to help? Well, just show up at a meeting. And by the end, we had we had meetings over in hotels over near the freeway where there was no standing room. And we had people from Bureau of Land Management and all these folks presenting their plans, and the people said, no, we don't want that. And to this date, most of that has not happened. Okay? We must protect, conserve our natural capital. Individuals matter. We're going around the same thing there. 3 big ideas. Include environmental and health costs in our planning. Influence environmental policy. That's what we've just been talking about. And become environmentally, sustainably literate. Understand how the world works. Then maybe you can make a difference. Okay? So this is not in the book. This is a little bit different. But this book ends by looking at, if we're going to become a more sustainable society, what are some of the themes that these groups, because they estimate there's 50,000 groups worldwide at least that are working on sustainability. Might be in the social sphere, might be in the economic sphere, might be in the environmental sphere, might be in all of them. But stewardship is one of the themes. All these folks talk about taking better care of what we are, managing things better. Okay? Managing relationships, financials, and preserving the biological integrity of ecosystems. Okay? Respect for limits, those tipping points. We can't just go on driving our Hemis and spewing out a bunch of fossil fuel waste. We've got to change, and we've got to respect that. We've got to realize that we could reach a tipping point. Okay? So how do we do that? Well, we prevent waste, pollution, unsustainable resource depletion, just what Chloe just said. We look now at a natural capital, soil, water, and we look at the sustainable yield, right? That's what you just said. That's exactly what is involved in this kind of thinking, okay? We protect biodiversity. Well, guess what? That's one of our principles, right? Protect or conserve, okay? We understand the interdependence of all these different systems, right? So the ecology and our economic system and our social system, our cultural system, they're all interrelated. And they're not just here in Victorville, they're regional and international. We live in this very globally connected world. And so these stuff goes through all levels. We can't just fix something locally. We need to look at the interdependence of all these systems. Economic restructuring, right? Yes, we have to expand employment opportunities, but there's different ways of doing it, more sustainable ways of doing that, okay? So big call for government and commercial ventures to support the needs of local communities. So big thing against the renewable energy was it actually wasn't going to bring any long-term jobs, hardly any, and it was going to cause a lot of other issues. So that wasn't, renewable energy wasn't a good economic solution for the high desert, the big plants. Fair distribution, okay, this is back to the third E, right? Equity, right? Social justice and equity, especially in areas like employment, education, and healthcare, right? We've got to make sure that we try to fairly distribute that. We just don't put those in the more preferable, economically stable areas. We need to shift in our social values, right? And then, things like micro-lending. Now, all of a sudden, take a chance on poor people. You don't have to have a bunch of equity in something, a bunch of collateral. You get money lent to you anyway. There's a bit of a controversy. Have you guys seen in the press right now? It's not the press that most people see, but about Muhammad Yunus and this program. I guess some of the things, the intent behind all of it wasn't quite. There's some questions about the integrity of it, but anyway, the concept of microlending is amazing. Okay? Intergenerational perspective. We have to look at us, not just about us and our lifestyle, but what's it going to look like in the future, in our grandchildren's and great-grandchildren's lives. And then the seventh one is this idea of using nature as a model and a teacher. Nature's been able to, with man not such an influence, make a lot of this stuff happen. So let's model and mimic nature as much as possible. So that's with how we do natural cycling. So if we're going to look for fertilizers, let's look for organic compost and natural fertilizers, because that mimics the natural carbon cycle, for example. Okay? And hopeful signs, there's a few cities. This is out of the book, Curitiba, Brazil, where they've done an eco-city. So far, folks answering the eco-city question on the final aren't doing such a good job. You've got to take the sustainable principles of biodiversity, chemical recycling, and solar, and apply it to an eco-city. And that, chapter 13 does that. So all that means to me, for the people that aren't answering that question very well, is you actually haven't studied chapter 13. So make sure that you look at, I'm just giving you a little review for the final, and make sure that you understand what principles and what sorts of things, like improving transportation structures, can you do to make a whole city more sustainable. Okay? Kerala in southwestern India, I don't got any ideas on that one. I've heard about it several times. I'll just have to go and visit. And then Lucerne Valley. You know, everybody's like, oh, I wouldn't live in Lucerne Valley. It's an awful place. The amount of community engagement in Lucerne Valley is crazy. I'll tell you how you know. If any of you want to start a McDonald's franchise, do not go to Lucerne Valley. They'll say, absolutely not. We do not want fast food. We think we want the local people. There's an incredible little burger stand out there. There's my favorite Chinese restaurant. It's unbelievable. And the Lucerne Valley Economic Development Association will probably have you run out of town in front of a shotgun. I mean, they just, fast food doesn't fit our lifestyle. We're not, so McDonald's, sorry, even if you wanted to come here, we're not interested. And the local mines support a lot, and I was just on a bike ride out there a few weeks ago. They did a whole bike ride to raise funds for Lucerne Valley High School, and the whole community was there. It's a very, very engaged, sustainable community. Of all the communities up here, the best example, I think. There we go. So, any questions? Any comments? You won't lose any points, but is there anyone that feels